For decades, Roland Barthes operated as the primary architect of structuralism. He adapted the linguistic theories of Ferdinand de Saussure to transform the study of signs into a rigorous, objective analysis of cultural phenomena. The foundational Saussurean model divides the sign into two parts: the signifier, or acoustic image, and the signified, the mental concept it represents. The relationship between them is arbitrary, yet together they form a stable, logical system of meaning. In his final book, Camera Lucida, Barthes abandons this objective science. He discards the rigid grid of semiology to embrace the unpredictable, irreducible contingency of the photographic image. Standard academic readings often classify Camera Lucida as a memoir of grief, overlooking the text's rigorous subversion of the Western philosophical tradition. Barthes' later writing moves away from savoir, a distanced, objective knowledge, to pursue savoir, a subjective, sensory understanding anchored in the physical body. Camera Lucida functions as a deliberate deconstruction of the ontological quest. Barthes uses the photograph to stop the search for universal truths, forcing a confrontation with an undialectical death. To reach this position, Barthes first attempted to dismantle power through semioclasm. In the years following 1968, he worked to break apart the signs of a culture he viewed as oppressive and ideological. The effort failed. Destroying old signs merely generated new ones, leading to the realization that language itself is a self-perpetuating network of rules that constructs its own forms of authority. He identified the core of this trap as the contract, the tacit, unwritten agreement regulating social exchange. Because this contract is strictly masked, it operates through a confusion of alibis and appearances. Language functions as an opaque barrier, creating imaginary embarrassments that prevent a direct encounter between the subject and the other. As the text on the glass suggests, the site of the contract of language is elsewhere, existing outside the reach of logical decoding. This realization led Barthes to semiatropy. Instead of treating the sign as a target to be analyzed or destroyed, he began to receive it simply as a personal spectacle. Western philosophy traditionally grounds itself in an arché, a foundational starting point. René Descartes used radical doubt to strip away all assumptions until he reached a single logical certainty: I think, therefore I am. Barthes requires a different foundation. He adopts his own ego as an experimental tool, invoking Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of the ego's ancient sovereignty to justify a highly subjective inquiry. The foundation of his philosophy shifts from logical doubt to emotional pain. His new premise is, I am wounded, therefore I think. The catalyst for this wound is the photograph. Looking at a photograph, he divides the experience into two elements. The first is the studium, the culturally coded, informative field of the image, including historical context and setting, which we perceive through education. The second element is the punctum. This is the accidental, completely uncoded detail that punctures the studium. It is a specific visual prick that creates an intense, unnameable disturbance in the viewer. The studium belongs to the traditional science of semiology, but the punctum demands a cynical phenomenology, a study of personal perception that refuses to be generalized into a universal law. Midway through his investigation, Barthes realizes his method is flawed. He writes a palinode, a formal retraction of a previous statement, mirroring Socrates retracting his first speech on love in Plato's Phaedrus. The classical Platonic model dictates an ascent. A philosopher observes the physical beauty of a specific body and uses it to contemplate the abstract, universal form of beauty itself. Barthes concludes that his initial attempt to classify photographs by personal taste was a hedonist project. It produced observations, but no actual truth about the nature of the medium. So he reverses the Platonic model. Instead of ascending toward a universal essence, he forces a descent into the absolute, non-transferable particularity of a single image of his recently deceased mother. The photograph strips away comforting abstractions. It forces a loving and terrified consciousness to confront the stark, literal reality of time itself. The truth he extracts from the image cannot be applied to anything else. It is the raw, undeniable realization of that has been. He locates this truth in the Winter Garden photograph, an image of his mother as a young girl. For Barthes, this specific picture reveals an innocence and kindness that formed her exact being. This quality exists outside of any system. Cultural codes, class markers, and family history failed to attach to the raw fact of her kindness in that frozen second. The Winter Garden photograph provides the essential evidence for Barthes' final transition, yet he excludes it from the printed text, leaving it invisible to the reader. To any other viewer, it would just be another old picture. Public photographs are dominated by history and costume, the clothing, the cars, the setting. These elements act as a screen, creating a stupefaction that distances the viewer from the subject's essence. Rather than a hidden treasure at the center of a labyrinth, the photo serves as Ariadne's thread, the singular line of inquiry that maps his personal path toward the heart of the medium. He uses it to propose an impossible science of the unique being. Where traditional science requires repeatable phenomena to form laws, Barthes demands a methodology for studying an essence that occurs exactly once. The defining characteristic of photography is not an aesthetic quality, but a mechanical confrontation with an absolute, irreducible past. Western metaphysics, influenced by the Hegelian dialectic, insists that death has a broader meaning. In this framework, the individual dies to satisfy the universal progress of the species, achieving historical continuity through reproduction. This generates the classical tragedy of generational succession, where the birth of the child ensures the eventual death and replacement of the parent. Barthes has no children, and by nursing his mother through her final illness, he feels he has effectively engendered her. This sequence of events stops the historical teleology. The dialectic terminates with him. A dialectical death is absorbed into history as a power to change the future. The photograph offers the exact opposite, a completely flat death. It presents a denatural theater. There is no narrative arc and no catharsis. Death in a photograph cannot be reflected upon or interiorized to provide comfort. The image forecloses the tragic entirely. It reduces human mortality to a strictly mechanical, chemical fact etched on paper. Barthes identifies the ultimate noema, the core essence, of the photograph as the that has been. It is a past fixed in silver and light, permanently severed from the living present. This that has been is the exact letter of time. It is a reality completely devoid of dialectical motion, containing no potential for a future. Gazing at the image of his deceased mother acts as a severe interruption. It strands the viewer in a state of suspended animation, waiting for their own inevitable end. This creates the madness of the photographic look. The subject's eyes stare out but see nothing, projecting an effect of truth while inducing a kind of madness in the observer who tries to meet a gaze that isn't there. A human life is severed and flattened by a single, irreversible click. In his final analysis, Barthes completes his subversion. He replaces the confident Cartesian "I think" with a starker truth: I am mortal. To philosophize is no longer to build grand systems, but to learn to read the photograph as the exact map of one's own disappearance.